Good evening and welcome to the conversation with the Executive Committee of Convocation. I'm Rofhiwa Madzena and I'll be facilitating an all-important discussion about the workplace post the COVID-19 pandemic. We all know that this was something that was unprecedented and changed the way we live, the way we work, the way we think, the way we engage with each other. And so with the new normal, we have to ask and answer questions about how we navigate this new world and how we do it efficiently in a way where we can pass on these learnings to the future generations who might be exposed to unprecedented events like the COVID-19 pandemic. Of course, I won't be doing this conversation by myself. I've got an esteemed group of panelists with me this evening. We've got the president of Convocation, Professor Boitumelo Diale, who's affectionately known as Prof D. So she is big on employee wellness, in fact, in psychology, and also a visiting professor at the University of Nigeria in Nsukka. And she's going to be giving us some insights on change management in higher education, studies, and employee safety. That is one big theme that's come across strongly as we have dealt with the COVID-19 pandemic. She'll be followed by Deputy President of Convocation, Ms. Zanele Modiba, who is the MD of the Alternative, and she's had led incubators both within government structures, talking here on SMMEs and financial services industry, very important phases within our economy, just in terms of finding ways to grow within the pandemic. And here the touch point that she'll focus on is the effect on SMME management. She'll then be followed by the council representative and member of the executive, Ms. Confidence Tshilande, a young engineer who's big on empowering the youth and women and really has served in social housing or the housing and construction industry, something that is very important for the South African economy because we know that infrastructure, construction are the big components to growing any economy. And her touch point will obviously be the change management in civil engineering, employee and health and safety. And then she'll be followed by Ms. Nondumiso Mvubu, who's also a council representative and a member of the executive committee. So she's obviously had great experience in the public sector service, in town planning, focusing on the housing sector and infrastructure development. And her touch point this evening will be the benefit of working remotely. All of us have had some experience doing that. It's been uncomfortable for some, and it's been a joy for others who have had to have work clothes on the bottom and keep their pajama pants on the bottom. That's been quite enjoyable for most. And then, of course, we get to my favorite part of any event, a Q&A session where we get to engage, ask questions, and really just find ways and coping mechanisms to move into the new normal. I mean, we've started the process, but it's an ever continuous one. And I must say, not all the questions will be answered this evening, but it's a learning platform, and we engage with each other and we walk away with some nuggets of wisdom, which we will carry through our daily lives. Before we get into it, some house rules. Please do engage. We've got a Q&A button, a comment section within the event. Ask questions, make comments, and we'll be answering this during our Q&A session. It is a lengthy one, so there is quite some time for us to engage you on the different topics that you want clarity on. Can I ask that our speakers keep their talking points to about 5 minutes maximum, but our president gets a special 10 minutes just because she's the president. So she'll have 10 minutes to engage us on her particular theme this evening. And then, like I say, a nice chunk of time, 45 minutes for us to engage on the questions and answers. Also, we are monitoring the social media pages. So whatever you want to share, we'll be monitoring that as well and share within those that are in attendance today. And just one final note, phones on silent for all of those of us who are in the same room. And yes, we are following COVID-19 protocol this evening. Very important that we are very clear on that at all times. With that mouthful, Professor Boitumelo Diale, I'll throw it over to you. Good evening and welcome.
Good evening, Rofhiwa, and thank you very much for this evening. Thank you for welcoming us. We are really excited as the executive of the Convocation. This is our first event for 2022. And I'm given an interesting topic. I thought I was the one who will get 5 minutes and my leadership will get 10 minutes. So, but I will do my best under the circumstances. It's interesting that you're asking me to talk about something that's very interesting, challenging, and yet so real in our lives today. Change management in higher education, especially post-COVID-19. I'm not even sure whether we have to say post-COVID-19, because at this stage, I think most of us are confused whether we are still in COVID, we are out of COVID, we are going into COVID. You know, there's so much happening around the issues of COVID. However, it is important for us to actually begin to explore the issues of change management in higher education in these times of post the pandemic or the big 2 years that we've had. When COVID hit us in 2020 in March, and we went through the different lockdowns and different systems, you know, we all went into our shells, into our corners, and we had to learn what is called or got to be coined the new normal. But in the process of getting into coining this new normal, we found ourselves cornered in various ways. Higher education had to move into online teaching, and we had to first learn the processes and the ropes of online teaching and learning. Everybody else, I guess even a grade 3, knows what Teams is, knows what Zoom is, because that became the life of the day. And we went on with that for 2020. And I guess most of us were saying, this is a phase, it will pass. Come 2021, we'll be back to normal. Little did you know that come 2021, we'll find ourselves still in the same situation, but even more probably worse than 2020. Maybe because psychologically, maybe I can speak about this from a psychological perspective. Psychologically, we had thought COVID is a passing thing and we'll be fine and done with it. So when 2021 were in the same situation, it actually hit us more emotionally and psychologically than it did in 2020. Whilst in higher education versus in industry and other small spaces, people lost jobs, people got unemployed, and all that goes with it. We were fortunate in most of higher education institutions, really people didn't necessarily lose jobs. There might have been different things that happened, but people still kept their jobs. So that was one of the things that in higher education that was important that happened. However, in the changes that happened in higher education, in moving into a hybrid, into an online way of teaching and learning, we got comfortable in the process. We got comfortable to say, if I have a 9 o'clock meeting, I can actually wake up at 8:30. By 9 o'clock, I'll be sitting in front of my laptop and I'll be busy with the meeting, and life goes on. At times, maybe we got into meetings even not having taken a bath. Nobody sees it on Zoom. So I'm fine, I'm going on. And we got used to that life. There we were, come 2022. And things were normalizing, and I will talk about us as the University of Johannesburg as higher education. Then we had to go back into classes. We started last year, September, we had to gradually go back into working from the office. And came January 2021, we had to prepare to go back into classes. And I have to say, we were anxious as academics, maybe we were anxious as a university, but little did we know how excited our students were looking forward to actually going back to the normal selves. And this tells us of who we are as human beings, to say the social fabric of who we are can never be removed by technology or can never be replaced by technology. We realized that in the past 2 years, there was a high rate of depression, especially with the youth. As the youth, we are vibey people. listen to me, I say as the youth, we are. I guess youth in South Africa is up to 35. I won't say how old am I, but I will count myself as youth. But as the youth, we are young, we want vibrant lifestyles and all that. So having been closed really led to many of our students, many of our children being depressed. For the first time in the field of psychology, we began to see high numbers of depression actually in children as young as 8 and 10 years old. It told how much of the stress that brought with. And it also brought some form of stress and anxiety, as for many of the students in higher education, parents lost jobs. The main breadwinners couldn't afford to put food on the table, and yet they have to study. Some of the simple things were things like we had given them data to study, but we never anticipated that this particular student might be in Kuankua or Umhlabuya Lingana, where even the data is there, but the network is not there. Vodacom just doesn't reach that space. And those were the little intricacies that actually COVID brought with us, and thus we're excited, and I understand the excitement of students coming back into 2022, into face-to-face teaching. However, Chair, we forgot one of the key things, that it had an emotional, psychological impact. And whilst we are excited of being back, we need to really and critically look at how do we carefully now help the transitioning back into the classroom, the transitioning back into the busy schedule of driving around, the transitioning back into being with other people in the same spaces, because that on its own has an emotional impact. I think for me, from a wellness perspective, from an employee wellness perspective, universities have, as the University of Johannesburg, has processes in place for wellness. And I want to urge our staff, both academic and even support staff, even though they are not members of Convocation, but I believe many of them are joining. Let us use the systems that university have put in place for us to be well. Can I please demystify the fact that going to a psychologist means there's something wrong with you? There's nothing wrong with you. You just are taking care of yourself, just like going for your annual medical checkup. It doesn't mean you are ill when you go for your medical checkup. If we begin to promote that, we can begin to see a better employee who is happy. And if our employees as academic staff are happy, our students are going to be happy. I want to finish this up, Chairperson, 3 things that I see as a gift to us by COVID. Bad as COVID sounded, it looked, and there are 3 particular gifts for me that I think COVID gave us. 1, COVID gave us the opportunity to treasure one another as human beings. COVID gave us the opportunity to live in humane with others, to be aware of the little things that we take for granted as human beings, to care for each other. But more than anything, which is my favorite part, everybody who knows me knows that, COVID taught us to actually ensure that work and play are actually 2 sides of the same coin. Let us work and play. Let us work smart and play hard. All the best for 2022. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Prof. What a note to leave it on. Work and play are coins of the same side. Very interesting insights there. We'll be engaging you a little later as we continue the conversation. Zanele Modiba, that is quite the act to follow. But you are engaging us on change management and the effect on SMME management. Take it away.
Thank you so much, Rofhiwa, and welcome to everybody. I think for us, what's important to note from an SME perspective is that the SME department is really about making sure that early adopters are shined upon. Small businesses are the early adopters of COVID. And what I mean by this is that while everybody else was trailing along, small businesses, because of the nature of small business, because inherent in small businesses, you have to make decisions quickly and swiftly. You have to use lean startups. You have to use your resources in a way that actually maximizes and leverages everything that you have. Small businesses, wittingly or unwittingly, were really positioned to really take COVID by the horns. And what I mean by that is that we were already using tools like Slack, Zoom, and Teams because small businesses don't have the resources to hire permanently. What happened though was that COVID brought in the angle of productivity. All of a sudden, as a business owner and as a leader in small business, you had to manage small teams and make sure that they were productive. Prof. Diale already mentioned the new normal around how we started to navigate work and how we weren't sure how the working times and play and balancing play and work. And that really hit home hardest for small businesses because as a small business leader, you're really already trying to leverage as many resources as you have. You're trying to hire smart, you're trying to not to fire individuals, but now COVID hits and all of a sudden budgets are shrunken. You are the last of the priority from a big business perspective, and you have to make sure that your resources are leveraged accordingly. And so what small business has to do and small leaders have to do is really manage change in a way that big business never has to. Because small businesses, everybody that has a small business and runs a small business knows that small businesses and the employees and employee relationships are different. It's almost like family. And so what I really want to help leaders in the small business fraternity to really manage now, because I know you are still going through the change, is how do you effectively change? How do you change people's mindsets? How do you move from tactics and strategies that you're so used to and now deal with the new normal in this whole environment that people are more clear about wanting to spend time with their families, understanding what self-help is, understanding that mental health is a priority? How do you, as a small business, prioritize the bottom line, productivity? Because essentially you're in it for the business and you're in it for the money. And I really want to speak to 5 steps that I think are really key in helping you navigate that change from moving from an early adopter of tools, but then now to a mature asset of managing your business. So let's start. The first one really is about building a case for change. People will go with you if you lead them, if you tell them the why. Why are we changing? Everybody knows that COVID is one of the key reasons we're changing, but how does it strategically align to the vision and the mission of the business? If you can declare your interests up front as a leader and say, look, we're changing. This is the big idea. This is why we're doing it. This is what is going to be the outcome. And this is where we're going. You're going to galvanize your workforce or your teammates to really go with you in that change process. Secondly, share the vision. Everybody, was working merrily up until 2019, and then boom, things change. All of a sudden, roles have changed. All of a sudden, people have to take on more. Others have to take on less. The business owner decides they want to streamline. Share the vision of where you're going with your team, and they will follow. You really, as a business leader of a small entity, need to lead from the front. And you have to be quite honest and say, look, there is no hard and fast rule. I'm building the scaffolding as I'm building the new business. So really have faith in your team and your leadership and say, this is the idea, this is why we're going there, this is what success looks like, and you're going to walk the journey with me, and we don't have the answers. I think a beautiful gift, as Prof said, a beautiful gift of COVID is really the honesty and transparency of business. There is no need to act as if you're this individual who has it all figured out. Everybody understands that we are learning as we build this airplane. We're taking flight as we're building the airplane. So really be honest and really leverage on the small wins as you go along. That's 2. The third one is resources and information. Everybody knows that small businesses have to deal with funding, they have to do with managing and streamlining resources, capital, cash flow, and human resources. So if you want to embark on an audacious change, make sure that you have an audacious budget. If you don't have the budget and you don't have the resources, what you're actually doing is you're hamstringing your team to making sure that they do something that they're not ready for and they're not prepared for mentally. And as a result, you'll be straining them mentally. A lot of people have been feeling overwhelmed. They don't know how to perform. They don't know what's going on. And because so many things are happening in this new change world, because things are really happening in real time. If you don't have the right resources, from a human perspective, from a funding perspective, and just from an experience perspective, I really would consider changing things in chunks and in phases, changing departments versus changing the whole ethos of the organization, making sure that you take it in bite sizes versus going for the big bang, because it does weigh on people heavily when they're not able to perform and it overwhelms them. The second last one is really talks about leadership. You have to lead from the front. You have to make sure that your workforce, your employees, your teammates are seeing you get up at the time that you want them to get up, are seeing you lead the charge, are seeing you change your habits. If you want to really make sure that you're tracking productivity, what are the standard operating procedures that you have in place to make sure that things are easy for individuals? So really, it's about making sure that you streamline things from an operational point of view, from a tactical point of view, but most importantly, from a leadership point of view. Everybody knows that you're human. everybody that knows that you're fallible. But if you have an expectation for your workforce to start work at a certain time and then play at a certain time, enforce that. If you are the type of person that Belgium has just done now to say that, you know what, we're having a 4-week work week, then enforce it. Don't send somebody an SMS on a Friday, get them all worked up, get them all nervous and wanting them to respond to the CEO. Really, where the tar hits the road is really about, are you keeping your word? And are they seeing that leadership is coming from you? And then I think that's when change will be easier to actionable from that point. And then last one is communication. I cannot emphasize enough how obvious communication seems. You obviously are communicating the vision. You're obviously communicating the tactics. You're obviously talking to them, but you don't have any idea of how people interpret communication. You have to have communication at all levels. You have to galvanize the workforce, so inspiration and motivation for your workforce. But for your managers, they need tactics, they need tools. That's communication. How best do you communicate the change from that level? And then from your leadership team, they need action. They need to be the people who are showing outcomes. So you really have to be clear about the level of communication you're giving and reinforce it. In PR, we have a saying that if it's not said 7 times, it's not said at all. Basically, that's why when you see a billboard 7 times, it's only then when the message registers. So make sure that you're over communicating. You're communicating clearly, and then you're checking that people understand what the mission is, where you're going, they're all on board, they're all on flight, and everybody's clear about what the change is and what the benefit of the change will be. And so as much as I want to say to SMEs, I know that you, and especially the leaders that are leading these SMEs, whether you're managing 3 people or 15 people, we know that it's challenging. We know that it's hard. We know that there are internal conflicts and external conflicts like legislation that's changing and all of these things that you have to navigate. But your team, your dream team, that is your most important resource. And if you're not communicating clearly about where you want to go in this new season, you don't have a business. You literally don't have a business. So focus on your internal team and then focus on your customers. And I think you'll be able to navigate this new normal, as Prof says, much more efficiently. And that's really the message I have for SMEs. I really want to say that I hope you have a prosperous business and a prosperous year, and really start communicating, because it's no longer about competition. It's about collaboration and creativity. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Zanele. Very, very interesting insights there. Focus on the mission. And what I did like or appreciate in your engagement here is the fact that you say we don't have the answers to everything. And that's why platforms like of this nature are particularly important, because we're all learning and we're all engaging each other on how to live and thrive within the new normal. So with that, I'm going to call on a Confidence Tshilande, who is going to be focusing here on change management in civil engineering, very, very important component here. And we're focusing here on employee health and safety. Take it away.
Thank you so much, Rofhiwa. It is indeed a very interesting space that we need to navigate through in the civil engineering sector. So we all understand that on the 26th of March 2020, we went down into level 5 lockdown, and you all were asking yourself, what's going to happen to the construction sites? We all need to be indoors. We all need to put our TLBs, our plants, and stop everything the way it is. But guess what happened? It was not all that bad. There's a bit of some lemonades that we were able to make from the lemons that we got during COVID-19. But however, let's first talk about the few challenges that we faced in the industry right when COVID started. The first common thing that we all know, and what my colleague mentioned, is that no one was ever ready. We were all not prepared for it. Nobody told us, and nobody studied for the pandemic. We understand the medicine students were prepared for some medical researchers that they've got all the facilities, but in the engineering discipline, nobody told us medical conditions can affect an industry such as the civil engineering industry. So basically what happened is that the infrastructure was just not ready. The buildings that we built were not proper to accommodate the challenge that we had. Hospital buildings were not even designed to accommodate the restrictions that the COVID-19 pandemic led us to. Emergency unit couldn't even cater for essential workers. The quarantine facilities were such a big mess and such an issue. And we realized that was actually a civil engineering task, or rather the infrastructure task. And at the same time, when we had that issue, we're actually not required to work. So how was this supposed to work? We're supposed to be closed down in our rooms, in our homes, whereas the world was in a pandemic where they needed us to be essential workers. So those are some of the challenges that we encountered. Look at some of the issues. We have always had an issue of water. as a country or as a world. However, people in the rural areas who do not have access to water were expected to have very much hygienic. They were told to wash their hands for more than 2 minutes, for using the certain type of method to wash their hands. And guess what the challenge was? We had a serious water shortage issue at that moment, which we couldn't even accommodate. Waste management was another issue. Residential dwellings were not designed to cater for such moments. We're required to social distance. But let's look at about very rural areas wherein you find a house dwelling with about 6 members of the family. How are they supposed to work from home? How are they supposed to study and learn in such an environment? That was such a big challenge that also speak to the housing sector, or rather the housing industry, that were they ever designed for such a time. So those are some of the issues that were affecting the industry as it is, to say, is our infrastructure designed to such a way that it caters for that? Let's look at the broad definition of civil engineering. It's basically a discipline that deals with planning, design, construction, and maintenance of structure. So I want us to talk about some of the things in specification to the planning, as well as the design, as well as the construction sector, to say what was the impact and what change management were we required to do. Looking from planning and design, I work for a consulting space wherein we're required to do more planning and design. And guess what? We were required now to start working from home, to start planning without even visiting the site, without being able to understand the type of work you're planning for. And when it comes to consulting firm, it's either you had work or you basically had no work. And this had a huge financial constraint, as Zanele has already spoken about, the financial impact that was there on businesses. And remote supervision, we needed to understand how to remotely supervise the work that's already been done. We needed to learn how to appoint locals in other countries to do work that we're supposed to do. And that, for me, I think as I get to speak about the technology impact, we realized that the lemons that we faced with actually were there to accelerate some of and help us to be more innovative in the sector that we're in and learn to do things differently. However, as we were remotely supervising some of the work and doing inspections remotely, we had to save on travel costs. As much as it looked like a very negative thing, it helped to actually empower locals to start doing work on our behalf. Collaboration with stakeholders and communities was such a mess. I mean, how do you bring together a community to ask them questions on the type of infrastructure we're designing for them? That was almost impossible. Those are people that don't even have Zoom meetings, and we had to make it work and make sure that we find more advanced method to engage and still take into consideration our communities that we built for. However, more than anything, we were now pushed as an industry to start looking at building adaptable infrastructure, automated infrastructure. Acceleration of digitization was right in the forefront, and we need to learn to do things differently from the way we've been doing things back then. And now moving to the construction side, which is basically the health and safety aspect, wherein we get to see people physically on site. And what happened when COVID-19 hit? We realized that, of course, constructions work paused at that moment. However, when we needed to return back, we're required to do what we call COVID tests. And some of the tests, besides the COVID test, there's what we call your medical test, your medical fitness test. And on the 22nd of April 2020, the South African Thoracic Society actually said that we can no longer do lung tests. So how do we get to do work if we're not sure of how our health and how our medical condition is? So some of the medical tests that we are required to do by the South African Health and Safety Regulation, we couldn't do them because they were against the health and safety protocol, the pandemic regulations. So those are some of the challenges that we faced. But come to think about it, this is very common. How do you do a construction work with a mask on when you're trying to climb and breathe in hard? That is actually a challenge that anybody can imagine how impossible it is. The COVID regulation requires us to social distance, but how does me and my construction partner get to carry some of the equipment and start building together? As in our work, we understand that we need to be partners in the work that we do. So those are the challenges that were posed on us, and we needed to be creative around that. Working in confined spaces, another challenge that we faced was basically shortage of construction resources. However, this is what the future looks like. This is how the future of civil engineering looks like. We have learned to adapt, and we understand that we need to be basically rather looking at the challenge that we have as a challenge that came to boost us as a country, or rather as an industry. In wrapping up, Our future infrastructure needs to be adaptable. We need to have convertible infrastructure. Our hospital beds were required with the minimum spacing of 3 by 3 meters, which is at the moment, in the days, we're not even designing for such. At the moment, we are required to change our design regulations in order to accommodate that. Our education systems, look at our classrooms. They were designed to accommodate a certain number of students. At the moment, we are now having an opportunity to redesign in such a manner that we still can maintain our health and safety. Our government buildings, our restaurants, the way you design your taps and pipes and infrastructure, this must now be aligned to ensure that we still align with COVID-19 regulations. Transport systems, the way you sit on your plane, the way you design your trains and taxis and buses. We all know that the taxi industry strike a lot. We thought that was an issue for that industry only. It's also an issue for us as a civil engineering infrastructure to say, how do we accommodate our bus station? How do we make systems and traffic accommodation all integrated in the system? So those are the greatest opportunities that have lined up in the civil engineering industry that we need to look at. I've mentioned the dwellings. We are redesigning infrastructure to make sure that whenever there's such a situation such as this, we'll be able to adapt. And the biggest of them all, which I know our VIS is very proud of, is the 4IR. In the civil engineering industry, we have understand that we need to learn to automate things. As we understand, there's certain things that need to be lifted and carried by machines because two people can't be that close, or two people cannot carry it with mask on, and such challenges that I've spoken earlier on. This is when we needed to accept that this is a case where we need to allow machines to do certain work, because as human beings, we cannot be close, or rather close enough for a certain, I'd say, proximity. Smart infrastructure, online shopping, our automated system in our shopping systems, those are quite a lot of things that we believe that are an opportunity for the future engineers of this country. And in closing, I'd like to say that our health matters, as our professor have already said. Working from home should be actually the new normal, as well as the balance of visiting the site. We shouldn't believe that the pandemic made us to do our work efficiently, but rather it has helped us to adopt new ways of doing things. We should be proactive and always be ready to adapt to change. We must be innovative, believing that we can always turn our challenges into opportunities. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Very, very beautiful insights that have come through from you there. But what struck me the most here is that your industry, civil engineering, should have been the one at the forefront of dealing with the pandemic in terms of altering the infrastructure to accommodate the changes that came with COVID-19. And yet you were forced to stay at home. But now the tides are changing, and obviously you can take the opportunities that have now come with the pandemic and embrace them as best as you can, as you said there in your closing remarks. Let's move on now to Nondumiso Mvubu, who's going to be talking us change management, the benefit of working remotely. This is the favorite part of the pandemic for many South Africans, actually many people across the world. You no longer have to drive. The professor even said that you don't even have to bath if you don't want to. You don't have to fully get dressed. It's an ideal working situation, but we need to navigate it in such a way where Zanele said, if you're going to be productive for this amount of time, make sure that you're making sure your team is doing what they're supposed to do in that amount of time, albeit remotely. So tell us, what is it that you have to say about this particular theme? Please, can we just have you unmute yourself? We are unable to hear you there.
Can you hear me now?
We can. If you could just maybe project your voice. You seem like a soft-spoken person.
Thank you so much. I think majorly the benefits of working remotely, the fact that I can actually be at home under the weather.
I think we are having a little bit of a technical issue with you, Nondumi. So I'm going to have our crew in the back end try to sort that out. In the meantime, in the interest of time, I see we've got a whole bunch of questions and commentary that are coming through. Maybe we can start to go through that until I get the green light on Nondumiso, and then she can share her insights on what she'll be talking through when it comes to working remotely. So, Prof, we've got the first one from Monica, who's addressing it to you. any tips on how one can effectively prepare psychologically to physically go back to the office after working from home since COVID hit us in March 2020?
Thank you so much for that question, Rofhiwa, and thank you, Monica, for that. The first step for industry and higher education is to understand that we don't have to let people now go back as in sudden, but we need to gradually allow them to go back. You know, of the 40-hour working week, sorry, we could say people should come to office 20 hours gradually, but also think about issues around time. You know, I've always said, I never know why in South Africa everything started at 8. School started at 8, work started at 8, so we're all in the traffic. Why don't we give each other space to say other people could start at 10? There's nothing wrong starting at 10 and finishing at 6, so that we stagger. But also, in terms of going back to the office, allow people to say, there will be times we are excited of being back at work and seeing each other. So some of the time might be stolen to our dear employers that we spend some 20 minutes just chatting and catching up on the 2 years. And that's just a way of just reintegrating the psychological well-being and the psychological self of going back into work and getting back into normal, because this is an essential issue of the psychological well-being of us as human beings.
Absolutely. You're a very popular Prof, because there's another commentary for you here, which I think is very important. And I had actually written this down in my notes as you were talking, and I see it's resonated from Vuyi here. Prof, do you think blended learning is possible on a long-term basis post-COVID within the SA higher education sector? And I say I wrote it in my notes because I was thinking we have to have a hybrid model where we are able to combine both the physical and the online spaces. But how do we then do that and do it well, Prof?
Actually, I can proudly say now, as a vice dean, not as the president, as the vice dean of teaching and learning in the Faculty of Education at UJ, the University of Johannesburg is using a hybrid mode in 2022. We have students who are attending our student exchange, actually, where we have those who would be online and those who are physical, but exchange that every student gets the opportunity to be physical, because we still need, our engineer talked about, the unreadiness of the spaces. So we need to still adhere to the 50% of our venues. So we use a hybrid mode, and I can report in the 2 weeks, my DVC, Professor Mpedi, wants stats from us, and I have to monitor that daily. And I am proud to say it is actually working very well. The hybrid model is working very well in the 2 weeks that we've been back into it. So as UJ, it's happening. We are on it.
No, absolutely. Let's move on to you, Zanele. My question to Zanele, same person, Vuyi here, engaging you as well, saying SMMEs have faced a lot of turbulence in this period. What are the plans as the executive committee in partnerships with the university to create spaces and room for recovery for SMMEs, either by funding, mentorship, education, etc.?
Thank you very much for that question, Vuyi. Actually, the Convocation has tasked themselves with working with UJ Entrepreneurship Department to make sure that individuals who are recently graduated, who may not have a prospect for work, but also those who are nascent entrepreneurs who want to start businesses and who want to commercialize their skills and turn their skills into businesses, to work through the Entrepreneurship Department as a partnership with the Convocation to make sure that individuals who have those skills can commercialize those skills. Look, entrepreneurship is a buzzword for all markets and all industries, and we know that a lot of small businesses have suffered. We've got your lifestyle entrepreneurs, we've got your techno entrepreneurs, we've got all types of entrepreneurs that are suffering. And the idea is that not to have one single solution just for UJ students. The idea is to have a model that can be replicated for our graduates who are unemployable, for those individuals who are actually in work, who want to take out their skills, who've decided that COVID has changed their lives for them and who want to be in business and want to commercialize their skills, and those that are entrepreneurs, that are small businesses who are struggling, whether it's mentorship. I mean, they've got a great mentorship sort of platform, and also whether it's tactical tools with our incubator. And so the Department of Entrepreneurship is obviously advanced in their modules as how they can help. They're also working closely with Pick and Pay, the Ackerman Foundation, to make sure that wherever you are in the entrepreneurial journey, you can plug in. Whether you are a nascent entrepreneur or a mature entrepreneur and small business, you can plug in. The plans are underway. They're not solidified, but it is an ongoing conversation that we're having, because we do understand that those are the individuals, the bottom billion that we call them, that are the ones that are suffering the most. So we keep the space, watch the space, and we make sure that we definitely communicate to you as an Exco how far we are with those plans. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Zanele. Thabo, Lethiwe, and Zama, I will let Confidence respond to your questions in a moment, but it does seem that we've got Nondumiso Mvubu back. Remember, she's talking us through the benefit of working remotely. Let's try you again, Nondumiso, and please remember to project your voice as you share your thoughts.
Hope you can hear me now.
We can hear you. Just please project your voice as much as you can.
Thank you so much. I guess the benefits are, number one, the fact that it's technology is allowing me right now to speak as I'm about 700 kilometers away from you.
But let's get the team on the back end to try and just clean that up a little bit. To Thabo and Lethiwe and Zama with you, Confidence, while we get the team fixing that. Let's start with Lethiwe, ladies first. Lethiwe and Zama says, thank you for your great insights thus far. For the construction, reflecting on the courses and modules you may have enrolled during your higher education studies, what would you recommend adjustment on the modules dealing with infrastructure given the current times? If yes, would you recommend what would you recommend to construction lecturers as well? Well, that's a big question.
It is indeed a big.
So I think essentially it's saying, what do I enroll in to help me deal with the current times, right? Because the models of before COVID don't necessarily accommodate our current COVID times.
Interesting enough, you must ask yourself this first question, that how does a 20-year-old experienced engineer still design modern infrastructure, right? If you ask yourself and rather find an answer to that question, you realize that engineering was not just about designing specific type of structures. It was more about learning the principles of problem solving. If you understand that part, you realize that you will not always get the problems that you learned in class. They won't copy and paste an example that you found in a textbook and say, hi, Confidence, please redesign this footing. No, you are presented with a building with a different type of problem, with a different type of road or a bridge in a very different environment. And each and every time you have to deal with, or rather you're presented with such a case, you are required to apply the basic principles. The principles which some of them were invented in the 1800s, some of them were invented in the 1900s. So those principles, they still apply as the basic theory that we definitely need in our day-to-day solving problem. However, as we are learning and as we're growing in the industry, we realize the importance of adjusting our education system to fit I would say the needs and the requirements of the society that we live in. We are currently in the 4IR, and by the way, there are countries that are already moving into the 5th industrial revolution. So what do we do as an institution to be in the forefront of technology? It means that we need to start to adopt and rather be flexible to changing our learning methods, to not just rely on the textbook, but rather continuously invent the lessons, or rather the type of courses that we'd be learning. But to go back to your question in simple words, what we're trying to say is that courses such as automation, courses around the 4IR, those are the courses that we need to be strongly implementing in our learning. Coding needs to be part of the core. As the president has already said that they are already implementing that in the primary phases. It's not just in the engineering industry, but in all industry, or rather across the institution as a whole. We are required to move as fast as we can so that we don't remain behind all the changes that we are facing.
I'm going to stick with you for this one more question coming from Tabo. And this is actually quite an interesting one, Confidence. He's asking, what was the increase in employee annual leave? How was the increase in employee annual leave days dealt with in the construction industry and that resulting impact in the industry's cash flow? You had mentioned that you were all forced to stay home and you couldn't engage your industry as you normally would have, particularly in a time of emergency. So how did you navigate that? Very briefly before we get to go on to some other questions that are coming through for the Professor and Zanele.
Thank you so much for that question. In our industry, it was basically, I don't want to call it forced leave, but it was rather a compensated leave. The more you took leave, the more you were compensated. And that was basically the business, trying to stay afloat and balancing the cash flow in that case.
Let's go through some other questions that are coming through here. It's actually quite an engaging session that we're having. Great presentation, Prof. D. Work hard, play hard. I think that's something many of the young ones are enjoying the most. But another one that's come through here, I think we've got a bit of a problem with the network here, but we can go through the ones that I've written down. We can come to you, Zanele, engage us on this particular point here. You said you had 5 steps that we needed to consider when dealing or this new kind of management that we have to deal with as we live within the pandemic. And the one that resonated with me the most was leading from the front. You find many entrepreneurs who don't know how to be managers. So is that a learning thing that you have to do? Is it something that you're born with? How do you navigate that particular space?
Thank you very much. I think for me, if you're going to lead a business, you have to lead from the front. And how you lead from the front is really just about experience. I find that nowadays individuals don't know what to do, but they're happy to outsource a lot of the core functions to other professionals who know what to do. You may not know the technical aspects of what to do, but you need to know what to look for. You need to know what to measure. You need to know what to test. So you may not know the brick and mortar aspect of this function that you don't understand, but leadership is about understanding the details of that function. There's a big anecdote about Elon Musk sitting there reading an engineering text, making sure that he understands the tactics of what he's asking his engineers to build. He's not going to build it, but he's going to measure it. He's going to monitor it. He's going to make sure that those individuals are following a certain optimized process to make sure that he is paying for the right service. And so leading from the front is really for me about putting yourself in the core of your business and making sure that you handhold every single discipline and walk through it. It's the same example about having a plumber come also your house, tinker with the tap, and then charge you 500 Rand. And you're like, why are you charging me 500 Rand? I'm charging you 500 Rand for the knowledge, for the know-how, for the how-to. That's 20 years of experience, even though it took me 30 minutes, 10 minutes, 5 minutes to fix the problem. So leading from the front is literally saying that I am the custodian, but I'm also the employee. I am the leader, but I'm also one who's going to be chastised when things don't go right. So for me, really, you cannot, it's a non-negotiable. When you lead a small business, even if you're not the leader or the CEO, but when you've got your own little department or your own little spreadsheet that you must manage, lead it, know it in and out, understand the values and the volumes of every single data point that you have to make sure that you are a leader of yourself. And ultimately, leadership is about self, right? So if you wake up and you don't know what you're doing, how you're doing it, when you're doing it, then you need to ask yourself a question, how are you leading your life? So I really think that it's not so far removed. When you lead yourself, and you lead your team and you lead your business, it all is succinct and must be aligned.
Prof, there was a conversation point that was brought up earlier around how do you negotiate with your manager or your lecturer about this hybrid model? It may have successfully been implemented, but it's still a negotiation in terms of finding that balance. How was that done?
How do you negotiate as what? As a student?
As a student or an employee with your employer or your lecturer. So in both instances.
I think in both instances, the issue of negotiation really is broad because negotiation, it depends on the kind of leadership that a particular manager uses. Once the university can put policies in place and we as managers can say, let's implement this, and put it on the ground. It is important that the managers on the ground also find the balance between implementing policies, but ensuring that in implementing policies, you understand that there are human beings behind these policies. There's a warm body, there's a heartbeat behind this. You know, if you say to me, now we are going back into normal, and I had actually taken my kid out of crèche because I couldn't afford it. Now my kid was with me at home, now I have to go back at home. Start negotiating with me, how do I gradually find the balance of saying my kid has to go back to crèche, but this 2-year-old or 3-year-old is now used to being with mommy on a daily basis. And that detachment could be traumatic to the child. And we can't just automatically say, come back to the office, that's it, you have to work. So it's balancing that, just like students. If the students were saying, I will give an example, in the first week, there was a big confusion that students thought, no, you can choose whether you want to come back or not. But we have to make it clear that it's not a choice of you want every student have to come back, and there is a kind of rotational timetable that different faculties use. But if you are unable to, in the first week, we're very flexible to say, there could have been children who were, students who were in Nkwankwa, and were not aware that coming back meant physically. And we had to understand that they will join online whilst they're getting money for the bus to come back to Joburg, and make sure that they get space if they don't have accommodation. So we are really implementing this, but we are taking the heartbeat and the warmth of the self into the process.
Sure, very interesting insights here. I've got Anonymous here, and I'm going to pick on you, Zanele. It's going to be a tough one, but I think that perhaps you guys can maybe work off each other here to engage this question. It says, what are SMMEs and the civil industry doing to close the gap between working with people and working with technology? So I want you to try to take a stab at it. And if you've got anything that you want to add, Confidence, please do. It's a very important question in my view, and we need to ventilate it as best as we can.
Thank you for the question. I think it's really relevant because a lot of people are talking about a skill set for the future, right? And so how are the traditional SMEs bridging those skill sets for the future? I think a lot of us know about organizations like She Writes Code or We Code, and all of these incubators and hybrid sort of incubators around coding and learning software development and digitization. And actually one of the small gifts of COVID has been e-commerce. A lot of businesses have been forced to now that if you're not online and if you're not on mobile, you don't have a business. So I think that coupled with the fourth industrial revolution, that technically, what does that mean for the layman? What does it mean for an SME, this fourth industrial revolution? It really means being part of where the marketplace is now for you. And I think a lot of incubators, a lot of civil society, NGOs, incubators and new businesses are really focusing on teaching people the trade of fourth industrial revolution. And that speaks to the language, coding, making sure that you're able to understand the e-commerce platforms and how to make sure that people are buying with Facebook ads, Google ads. And so from an SME perspective, what I want to say to it, and Confidence you can add on, is that you have to speak the new language of e-commerce, media, online, digital, Facebook, Google. You might be agnostic and you say, oh, I'm a Facebook person, oh, I'm a Google person. You cannot afford to be a platform agnostic as a small business. You have to take a step at every single platform and really learn to speak a new language. I know nothing about coding, but I'm definitely going to make sure that I know the best coders so that I can manage them into translating their skill set, that language, into a business platform that makes sense for me. So it's really about saying you have to convert your skills through a sense of outsourcing, but also through a sense of re-educating yourself and what the language is. For small business, 2 languages you need to care about: the language of fourth industrial revolution and the language of money. And it is in your best interest to equip yourself with both.
I'm sure you want to add on to that.
Absolutely, and I think Zanele has already touched on quite a few points. But I think in the civil engineering aspect, it's really no-brainer. It's the same question you'd ask: how do my grandma trust that my bank card actually has that cash? It goes about educating and building trust with the systems that are already in place, because the truth of the matter is that we're not going back. We're not going back to the 1900s. We are moving forward. We may just be very slow and be the laggards of every single innovation and technology. But the truth of the matter is that you end up throwing the old TV, you end up throwing the old radio, and that adapt to the new way of doing things. So it is all about educating people constantly without the patience and making sure that we build the trust. Because the issue is not that there isn't technology and it isn't that the people don't trust the technology. It's the fact that, it's not that there isn't technology, but rather that people do not trust that it will do the work the same way. That's the issue we always have with all this, whenever we introduce new things. The softwares in the industry that we're learning to design something, we always have to cross-check with hand calculation to make sure that this software actually designed it the same way I would have designed it for 5 hours using the textbook method. So it's about building that trust and making sure that we educate our people to trust the new inventions.
Here's a question that I think all three of you will be able to answer. It's also a very difficult one, but also a very important one. How can we address the impact of COVID on youth with disabilities? This is something that is usually neglected quite often. We don't address it as thoroughly as we should be. So Prof, I want all of you guys to try and give this some thought and engage us on this important topic. And I want to start with you, Prof.
Well, I think I can go to town because that's my field of research,
Yes.
Basically, in terms, and the key thing for me is people with disabilities or youth with disabilities and their career transitioning and how COVID has impacted on them. So, and one of the typical examples I could give that was a big challenge with masks. It's of people and youth with autism and having to put a face mask and the challenges that were there, So whilst we have it in our human rights and many other policies in the country that I can count, I think we still have a long way to go and we have a lot of work to do in terms of just taking care of the field of disabilities and people with disabilities. But in terms of COVID, yes, we might have ignored it in a way, but it was interesting that if you look at other people with disabilities, I know I work with children with disabilities. I had children with intellectual disabilities who would be the one when you remove a mask, they would say, hey, Dr. Tumi, put your mask back. So they learned the rules so quickly. They learned to adjust. So sometimes we take for granted that they are not because they've got, but because they don't have disabilities, but they are differently abled. We need to recognize that and be able to know that they can teach us one or two things.
Absolutely. What are your thoughts, Zanele, particularly in the scope of work that you do?
From a marketing perspective, because my background is marketing and comms and advertising, I think we were quite early adopters in inclusion. In media, and if you look at the media industry, they were the first to say, print is dead or print is dying and move digital before even COVID struck. Marketing and advertising often uses the soul of a product or the soul of the country to really speak about what's happening in culture, and that whole space of marketing and media really is generally inclusive. And so I think actually often you'll see even in the modern fraternity, individuals that are, as Prof said, differently abled are almost used as beacons. I'll use an example of in the modeling industry for albinism. They make sure that they have albino models and people with freckles to include them when the narrative about albinism was a big thing in South Africa and in KZN in particular. They made sure that they included them. So I think from a marketing, comms and media perspective, the industry is always been open-minded because generally a lot of people that are in the industry are creatives. And I think a lot of other industries can take a leaf from the marketing and media fraternities about inclusion. And for me, I think that it's almost like the racism debate or the ageism debate or any ism debate. It's really about COVID has taught us there is no more time for isms, because every single time we have a tragedy, the isms rear their head. The racism head is there. The class head is there. The divide, the rich divide is there. And so for me, the big gift following on Prof's theme of COVID is making things transparent. People, we have different individuals. We are a diverse nation and a diverse world. We're seeing how diversity is really influencing the narrative. And so whatever industry you're in, whether it's education or media or engineering, make sure that you ask yourself, who else? What more? how deeper, how further can I go with my mission? And in that way, you have a really inclusive ethos about your business and about yourself.
Any thoughts?
Yes, I want to come from the on the angle of what lockdown did to us, especially level 5. We're basically more like handicapped in our desk for the longest time. And guess what that did to us? It basically pushed us to be more innovative in saying, what can we do while we logged in our chairs, or rather handicapped in our chairs? And that gave us to a big rise in our social media spaces. And what is it that the social media did? It became a big, or rather it became a big boost on the business side of things. When we look at a disabled person, it's somebody that sometimes they're not interested in traveling and moving around. And what did social media do? We found things like online opportunities being increasing more than ever. Online shopping was made much simpler and faster than before. And a good example is an entrepreneur was good at artwork. Back in the days, they thought they'd only put their artwork in the street for someone to buy it. But through social media, we're seeing artwork being sold as quickly as possible to the furthest as Cape Town. A young girl in Limpopo now can actually design something so beautifully, or design some beads, and there's someone who is in the other part of the world can easily access that. And I can assure you, before COVID, this was not a norm. It became a norm because of social media and because we're all locked down and handicapped in our chairs. The courier services have now improved more than ever, meaning that it is such a big opportunity even for disabled people to say, right now you can actually do anything you want to do because the systems have been put in place, or rather COVID helped you put all the system in place. And lastly, social media created what we call the support groups, online learning, online courses. Somebody who realized, actually, I've been told I can never fly in my entire life. Now they can do a Harvard course online and finish it. Those are some of the best benefits of what COVID-19 has rather had an impact when you look at the disability side of things.
No, absolutely. Thank you very much. We are running out of time, unfortunately, and there's obviously so much to discuss. When you get into something, it's difficult to get out. But we're going to have Mr. Nell Ledwaba, who's the Senior Manager for Central Academic Admin, as well as Alumni, to engage us on the questions that have to do with the alumni at UJ and really just getting involved. If we could just, let me find a couple of them, if we could just go through them, and Nell could read them for us. Or do you want to read them yourself now?
Thanks, Program Director. I only noticed one where they ask how can they get involved in alumni engagements and initiatives. But, well, thank you for that. I thought maybe the president of Convocation was going to respond to this, but let me try and or attempt to respond. In our office, what we do if you want to get involved, we launch chapters, affinity groups. So if any of those who want to join, we're calling upon you to come and participate in these chapters and affinity groups and more. Attend and join our events. We've got more events on our event calendar. We have got a very busy schedule, and then more than that, also make use of our benefit scheme, which we have just going to launch in a moment or so, in a day or two. Please make sure that because of being an alumni, it's also a benefit. But speaking of alumni, it's not only the constituency under Convocation. We do have retired academics and academics who are also calling upon academics who have joined us to say they can also be part of these affinity groups and part of chapters, and there are a lot of benefits in participating as such. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And of course, an email link with all those details that have just been ventilated by and now will be shared within the chat so everybody can have access to that. I just wanted to read a couple of compliments because we all like a nice compliment every now and then. Before I hand it over to the Prof, who happens to be the president, to give us some closing remarks before we officially end this sitting. So let's start. One said at Mutsidisi here, Prof, that is a very, very relevant point, and that's very difficult in the engineering industries. Some managers, especially those with 30+ experience, have managerial systems where they're blatantly refusing to adapt to change. So negotiating with them becomes very risky because there is a time where there will be retrenchments. So, and then it becomes toxic. So that's just a thought on that last comment you made. And then someone says, Ro, thank you very much. An amazing young team. Amaria Sutra Pillay, great discussion. And then we have, there was a really nice long-ish one. Yes, this is a comment. This is from Ro as well. This conversation is captivating and insightful, and the facilitator, thank you, as well as the speakers are engaging and clear and passionate about their talk. I am loving the talk. What an inspiration to the new generation. Well done to the team. I mean, it just shows that everything that we've done, all the adaptation that you've had to do in your line of work over the last 2 years is something that you can now put on to those who are still learning, so they can find their feet and continue to adapt to the new normal. With that, Prof, I want to give you the opportunity to give us some closing remarks so we can end the session.
Thank you so much, Rofhiwa, for this. In closing, I want to say to you, my dear alumni and convocants, we have gone through so much pain, grief, and loss. And not only loss in death, but all forms of loss in the past 3 years. I want to call on all of you that it is time for us to find and listen to our heartbeat. Let us go back to finding ourselves. Let us try and laugh and love as much as we can. You know, I always say, I don't understand. For maybe you'll tell me in your field, why do adults always have to pay a David Gawu as combat to laugh? Why can't we laugh on our own naturally like children? So let us go back to the child in us. Let us laugh like a 3-month-old baby who will roll out in laughter, because laughter is healing. And together, as my Deputy President Zanele has said, there is no more time for isms. Together, we can make this world a better place to be. And by the way, I hear today in 2 conversations I've been for the day, I hear the word that we are Uberizing everything now. I hope we are not going to Uberize the social network of being the self and of being human. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor. And thank you all for joining us for this all-important conversation. We did say it was the first one for the year. May it not be the last. It is obviously something that many people have enjoyed, and I think that it's something that should be continued. And I just want to end on something very important you said at the beginning of your engagement, Professor, that the social fabric of who we are can never be removed by technology, and it relates to your closing remarks as well. And that is something that I'm hoping that we will bear in mind as we continue on in the year 2022, adjusting to the new normal. The pandemic is not going to go away. We're just going to have to get used to it and adapt. Thank you to all of you for joining us in this session. We really appreciate your time. From myself, Rofhiwa Madzena, my excellent panelists, and of course, the technological team in the background, social media team, thank you for everything, and I'm hoping we'll get together very soon for another engaging session. Have a good evening. Goodbye.
The University of Johannesburg, the future reimagined.